Is there anyone in Star Wars whose meaning is more debated than Kreia?
The true war is waged in the hearts of all living things, against our own natures, light or dark. That is what shapes and binds this galaxy, not these creations of man.
There are many characters with more screen time and lines to dissect, but pound for pound, minute for minute, when it comes to the heart and soul of Star Wars, it's hard to imagine another character who casts a longer shadow than her. She's a walking encyclopedia of the Force and Force users, a diegetic critic and a guide to their universe's metaphysics. Like any good critic, you don't have to buy into her perspective to gain new insights about the world. One of the most fascinating things about her is how even the die-hard fans who have played the game inside and out still struggle to wrap their heads around her. She's often represented as an unreliable narrator shrouded in mystery, whose words can't be trusted. But if you approach her like Atten says, and just listen,
all it takes is being around people enough to read them. You should try it sometime.
Resisting the main character compulsion to get your shit in, she'll reveal everything about who she is and what she believes. And in doing so, she becomes one of the most human characters in all of Star Wars, in all games even. She may be confusing and seemingly contradictory, but hopefully, after this video, things like this will start to make weird sense. This game, even with all of its unfinished buggy issues, has been my favorite Star Wars thing for a long time. I'm not sure when that shift happened, but it's somewhere in the haze of replays and reflection that I've had with the game over the years. In fact, I've had this video on my mind for about 6 years now. So after installing a few mods like the Restored Content mod, Lightsabers on Paragus, and some texture packs, I began my adventures against the Sith Lords in a new playthrough. But what I would soon realize is that this one wouldn't be the same as any of my previous playthroughs. My perception of the game, Kreia, and some of the most fundamental aspects of Star Wars were altered in the very first interaction you have. Illustrative of every other conversation you will ever have with her, she opens with a nag.
Find what you're looking for amongst the dead.
This is said after we've had 3 confirmations of her death. T3 on the Ebon Hawk, the medical bay's video log, and the exile inspecting her body herself. Now, she wasn't really dead. She's cagey about what precisely was going on, but we have to conclude that she was about as close to it as possible, the distinctions being somewhat negligible since the exile had to be revived for her to be lifted from her purgatory anyway, creating a sort of symbiotic resurrection. Some sort of forced-induced super coma where she's nestled within the exile's own spirit. She's in a medical bay on an important mining facility, and the medical staff literally said that there were no life signs. The symbolism is powerful. Sitting up from her deathbed, we see that she's an inversion of the messianic figure, an apocalypse figure, an, extinction entity. Instead of raising from the dead at the end of the story to show mastery over life and death, proving the efficacy of her journey, you meet her first as a dead person who rises from the blackness to reprimand you. You can see briefly that her eyes are gray and lifeless. You learn later that they've atrophied from lack of need or use. But again, the message is clear. For now, her intentions are hidden. From this point on, death will echo throughout their story in every choice and conversation. She fell from death into the exile's life. These realizations played into the way that I began to view her for this playthrough, and brought to mind another important literary figure. When talking about great falls from grace, the sort of which Kreia experienced prior to the intro, no analysis is complete without discussing the Big D himself, the one whose fall was so devastating that the impact has echoed through humanity for thousands of years. Before his fall in John Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan was known as Lucifer, the greatest angel in heaven. He is described as a powerful and charismatic figure, possessing qualities that make him appear heroic to both the reader and the angels he led. However, his lofty position in heaven and self-esteem created a strong sense of individualism. Driven by unfairness and injustice, specifically regarding the exaltation of the newly begotten Son, he rebelled. He perceived Jesus' position as a breakdown of meritocracy, nepotism of, quite literally, the highest order. Milton says this: "He of the first, if not the first archangel, great in power, in favor and preeminence, yet fraught with envy against the Son of God that day, honored by his great Father and proclaimed Messiah, King anointed, could not bear, through pride that sight and thought himself impaired. His fear of being replaced as a Son of God by the Son of God made him furious. This breakdown of the established order developed resentment and hatred in him until he led a civil war against God, resulting in his ultimate ruin. From beauty, purpose, and grace, he fell and transformed into Satan, hideous, irrelevant, and ruthless. In the first book of Paradise Lost, we find Satan lying in the burning lake of black fire, darkness and death gathering around him. He fell through the void of chaos for 9 straight days, a prolonged and tortured murder of the angel he once was. When he finally comes to, he gathers his wits and through a conversation with Belial, informs the reader of how he ended up in this pathetic situation. As a leader of angels, he used his high rank in the Legion to sway about a third of them to his side, leaving them all in this horrible place, the fruitlessness of the efforts not being lost on him. I think people often view this guy as being ignorantly blinded by pride. How could he ever stand against God? But it was more of a principled decision than anything else. To him, the most important thing wasn't necessarily victory, not that he wanted to lose either, but being a figure of rebellion and betrayal, as he felt betrayed, against God. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, after all. This kind of pettiness is not uncommon amongst the holy either, for Milton will later establish in Book 7, lines 150 through 161, that God knows he can fix Satan's damage in a mere moment. He plans to create a new world and a new race that will choose to love God of their own free will, and one day, after they've proven themselves worthy through faith in his Son, they'll live in a perfect, unified kingdom with God and the faithful angels who remained in heaven. When Satan comes by this knowledge, he is again furious, but knows exactly how he will exact his revenge. In every life that Kreia has lived, she found herself in positions of power as a leader of people. As Arin Kai, she was a Jedi Master and historian. She was looked to by other Jedi for her understanding and wisdom in the Force. She observed the Jedi Code to an extent, but like everyone who's ever fallen from the Order, her personal code of ethics clashed with theirs, not least of which she was in a devoted relationship and even had a child. In her time, she also trained a Jedi Padawan, including Revan, twice. When Revan was a Padawan, he was trained first by her. Then when he sought out matters of the dark side, he came to see her again. As a Lord of the Sith, she took on the mantle of Darth Treya, and in that time she helped oversee the Treyas Academy to some extent, and trained 2 other Dark Lords, Nihilus and Scion, in obscure subjects like Force Wounds. Finally, in her third and lowest state, the one we're most familiar with, she yet took on another apprentice in the Jedi Exile, another person whose actions would have consequences for the entire galaxy. Regardless of where she went or who she met, she always found herself leading people and helping to elucidate the great mysteries of the universe. By the point in which we find her in the morgue, her many lives have created someone who knows everything and can be taught nothing. You can't stump her. For every smartass remark or moralistic grandstand, she has a retort that puts you back in her place as her apprentice. This is her adventure to lead, not yours. The decisions you make are only possible because she arranged the circumstances around which they could even take place. She has fallen multiple times, each one its own death and rebirth. This sort of language isn't new to Star Wars, of course. When Ben Kenobi was asked about Luke's father, Ben told Luke that Anakin was killed by Darth Vader, later confirmed by Darth Vader himself. Literally speaking, Vader was cut down by Obi-Wan on Mustafar, but Anakin died the moment he raised his lightsaber against Mace Windu. The tortured expression on his face during Windu's conflict with Palpatine exists to show us the literal battle happening within Anakin during those moments. The child who once loved his mother died. The young man who so affectionately cared for Padme was struck down, and over him stood Vader and Palpatine. The physical scarring and transformation by the fires of the space hell were but an outward reflection of what already happened inside of Anakin. Feeling responsible for Revan's fall post-Mandalorian Wars, Kreia followed in his footsteps to try and find him and glean answers. Her path eventually led her to Malachor 5, where she only found death and wounds in the Force. There, her studies on the dark side and the wound created on the planet completed her fall, turning her into Darth Kreia, one that holds the knowledge of betrayal. She later left that role behind, allowing another to adopt it, someone who was betrayed in their heart and will betray in turn. That person was Atris. Atris's adherence to her ideology over people eventually led her to feel betrayed by the Exile when the Exile left the Order to fight in the Mandalorian Wars. Atris had developed a deep affection and admiration for the Exile over the years, and took it as a personal affront that she chose to fight with Revan instead of standing with the Council's decisions. Atris's fall was much slower and far more sinister than Revan's, but no less based on a feeling of betrayal and adherence to Jedi hubris. She held to her ideals of the Jedi Order even when she had clearly fallen. To the very end, she was unable to admit the errors in her code and beliefs. To deny the possibility of ideological betrayal is to deny the humanity of your own life.
To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned.
About Revan, Kreia says that he fell out of self-sacrifice.
The galaxy would have fallen if Revan had not gone to war. Perhaps he became the Dark Lord out of necessity, to prevent a greater evil. I do not believe the Jedi Council changed Revan as they claimed. They merely stripped away the surface and allowed the true self to emerge again, someone who was willing to wage war to save others.
This tracks with what she said about holding ideals. Revan made the call to detonate the mass shadow generator at Malachor 5, a deep, horrible betrayal that committed him to the fall. Revan knew the Mandalorians needed to be stopped, and only the complete sacrifice of the Jedi Order would be enough to stop their onslaught. This was a sacrifice that neither Atris or Kavar or any of the Jedi Council were willing to make. Revan then wanted the true Jedi, those that would protect the innocent despite the Order's wishes, to die before they fell to the dark side, which he knew was inevitable in the wake of such a horrible war that went directly against the Council's wishes. Betrayal. The galaxy couldn't survive that many Jedi falling, so they had to be eliminated. His fall was his sacrifice, as Kreia puts it. The Mandalorian Wars were corrupting everything, creating wounds across the galaxy. But a legion of fallen Jedi would have destroyed the galaxy even faster. On this topic, Hanhar says, "Madness is not always that, to one who can see it for what it is. Perhaps it is something that I had not considered. But perhaps I saw no strength in them becoming like me, either a slave or a predator. The lesson of strength is this. It is not having the strength to kill those you hate, but those that you love. Strength is when you crush their lives beneath your hands, murder them to save them from falling into the Shadowlands, as you have. You know what happened when you killed the tribe of Mandalorians, and why the Jedi had to die, so they did not become as the Mandalorians do. It was a coward's way of killing, but the choice was strength, to kill your brothers and sisters, those of the tribe who stood with you in battle. When you no longer try to block out their screams and their blood mats your hide, so much so that nothing will clean them, that is strength." With what we know of Atris's commitment to the extremely flawed Jedi Code and her subsequent fall, did he make the right call?
It is such a quiet thing to fall, but far more terrible is to admit it.
Kreia said this from experience and in direct relation to Atris's fall, which had mirrored Kreia's in some ways. Now, we don't know the exact sequence of events that led to Kreia's fall from the light side. Was it expulsion from the Jedi Order because all of her other students fell? Was it when Revan killed Usanus in a duel, her lover? While we don't know the exact betrayal that instigated the fall, due to her Jedi background being mostly speculation, we know that in the case of the Sith Triumvirate, she was directly betrayed by Sion and Nihilus, which led to her fall, cut her off from the Force, and left her for dead. Throughout her life, Kreia was made a victim by other people. She carried immense power and influence, but that wasn't enough to stop others from taking full advantage of her. After all, if she was to be Darth Kreia, she had to be one who was betrayed in their heart, and would betray in turn. She experienced horrors and indignities unimaginable after everything she's learned about the Force, knowing that it has a will and direction for people's lives. It's no wonder that she feels this way.
Because I hate the Force. I hate that it seems to have a will, that it would control us to achieve some measure of balance when countless lives are lost.
Hatred stemming from a deep-rooted sense of betrayal. Disunity with the order of the cosmos. These are feelings that can be destructive, but are come by honestly. Victims become victimizers, after all. After Satan fell from heaven and learned of God's plan for restoration, he devised a scheme to destroy this new reality. In his rejection and injury, he is ever more convinced of the horribleness of God's sovereignty and schemes of a new way to fight, by tempting and destroying God's greatest creation. The war between the Jedi and Sith are akin to religious wars between two groups who believe they have the one true understanding of God. In Star Wars terms, the Force. For someone who has been on both sides of that line, Kreia rejects this as petty squabbling of interpretation that only furthers the will of the Force and does harm to all life. Look, she's clearly a dark side user, but she's not interested in buying into a specific system of belief anymore. She wants life to be unbound from the tyrannical Force and aims to use her bond with the exile to set off a chain reaction of Force deaths.
Because I hate the Force. I hate that it seems to have a will, that it would control us to achieve some measure of balance when countless lives are lost. But in you, I see the potential to see the Force die, to turn away from its will, and that is what pleases me. You are beautiful to me, exile. A dead spot in the Force, an emptiness in which its will might be denied.
Like Satan, she manipulates her chosen one to overthrow their reality of subservience. From a leader of angels and Jedi Master to a rebel warrior and Sith Lord, to finally being defeated and cast out completely. Satan and Kreia had very similar paths to upending the heavenly structures under which they were subject. What people often get wrong about Satan, though, is that he's not fighting against God as an equal but opposite being, as hilarious as that ideology can be. He's fully under God's dominion as a raging and discontented subject who is ultimately being used for God's glory. Which, of course, raises questions of responsibility, culpability, all of that, topics for a different video. But in the same way, Kreia begrudgingly lives under the dominion of the Force.
It is said that the Force has a will. It has a destiny for us all. I wield it, but it uses us all, and that is abhorrent to me.
But sees a future where life can be released from the metaphysical God construct. She hates the Force and her role in it, but knows that there's nothing to do apart from these things. She doesn't worry about what is to be, but manipulates in the hopes of seeing her wishes realized through the exile.
Through battle, Revan was meeting betrayal with betrayal, and showing Malak the pain he had inflicted on his master. What stronger display than death for conveying one's sense of being betrayed by one's own student? Revan's anger must have been great indeed.
To claim to know anything of Revan's choices, or what lay in his heart when Malak fell, is conceit, servant of Atris. And whether Revan had any choice in the matter at all is something else you should consider. The Force is a powerful thing to wield, or deny.
But to say that seems an untruth based on what I know of the Jedi. The Force can drive others, but there is still choice, is there not?
Ah, but at what point does the power the Force exerts submerge any attempt at choice or free will? You have taken a complicated question, servant of Atris, and you have trivialized it with your answer and lack of experience.
If there is no choice in the Force, then our teachings and our actions are for nothing, and I refuse to believe that is true.
Both Kreia and Satan somewhat resign themselves to their fates, even as they passionately revolt. They know they're just cogs in God's machine, but they fight with contempt anyway. A crucial point where Satan and Kreia diverge, though, is how they respond to the offer of redemption. Satan has a moment where he struggles with the idea of returning to heaven were he to repent, but feeling hopeless, he commits to the plan of corrupting God's favorite creation anyway. Milton wants us to know that God does indeed forgive. The offer of forgiveness is always there, but Satan is too far gone to embrace forgiveness. Instead, he chooses to stand in the way of human progress as a symbol of hubris. Milton used Satan to reaffirm the Christian story. Given that, Satan's justification for fighting against fate is due to his proud inability to serve God. He suffers greatly in doing so, but feigns happiness in his insecure misery. At the end of a light side playthrough, Kreia relishes the opportunity of forgiveness, even if she doesn't take it.
I have thought of this moment more than you know, and I wondered if here at this ending between us, if you would care enough to try to save me. If a Jedi could find it within themselves to spare one who has fallen so far. I wanted you to say those words. For that I am grateful.
But that's kind of contradictory, right? After all that she said about redemption and charity, how could she stand there honestly and appreciate the exile's offer of redemption? Kreia was willing to betray her ideals to the very end, staying true to the lesson of strength. All of the posturing and intellectual pageantry is gone. In this place, in the Treyas core, a place desolate of life and hope, she lets her guard down and reveals that the offer of redemption is everything that she wanted from the exile. What the exile offers is something that can come from no one else, for she is the only one who matches Kreia's own ideal Jedi, and for this, she's satisfied to her very center. She tried her best to break the exile, even going so far as to threaten the complete destruction of the Force and all that would entail. With everything still at stake, with every person's life who holds a bond with the exile hanging in the balance, she's still shown compassion, proving the honor of a true Jedi and giving hope to Kreia. She genuinely didn't think it was possible for a Jedi like this to exist, and threatened the destruction of everything to prove it. She then expresses her feelings for the future of the Jedi Order. Atton, Beodur, Mira, Visas, Disciple. She calls them the lost Jedi, the true Jedi, upon which the future will be built. They just needed the exile to lead them into a new era of Jedi code, where they put life above adherence to a law, and not be in direct violation of the Council. Being a good Force user, a good person, is possible in this universe, but from where Kreia stood in the beginning of the adventure, there seemed to be none left. And Disciple echoes this.
Jedi are not supposed to be like the rest of us, and they are supposed to train students responsibly, and yet all I saw was ignorance and arrogance, and what those seeds created in the Republic. It is difficult to follow the Jedi Code when so few others have, but you know this.
What he knew, what so many prominent Jedi missed, is that you could follow the letter of the law while ignoring the spirit of the law. This was incredibly perceptive of Disciple, and shows an intuition that would make him a great Jedi, and also shows why Kreia treated him with such caution. They actually weren't that far apart in their Jedi ideals, which makes her point about him all the more poignant.
If he leaves this place, he will leave the galaxy behind him. He will sit upon the new council, reluctantly as all good men do, and he will not forget the Jedi who had lost the Force, yet showed him the way to reclaim it.
As I said earlier in the video, I've thought a lot about how much I like Kreia, but it's only now that I really understand why. For all the bitching and nagging, it wasn't that she couldn't be proven wrong, but that she would never be proven wrong rhetorically. I love these conversations with her. She's too smart, too experienced. Verbal sparring can be useful for understanding, but it does not make a true Jedi. That's part of Kreia's lesson. She wanted the exile to be faced with incredible moments of temptation. Moments where she could abuse her power and get away with it. Moments where she could be a glory-hungry parasite and still follow the Jedi Code. Moments where she would be tempted to strike down a chronic traitor and feel good about it. She wanted to tempt the exile with the drug of betrayal, but unlike every Sith to come before and after, she truly wanted the exile to not take the bait. Kreia constantly calls acts of charity and selfishness both into question and expresses doubts about the exile's motivations. What was it all for? The mind games, the manipulation? To address that, we have to look at the morgue one more time and really notice the power of the exile. Healing. Kreia says that if the exile hadn't come along, she likely would have been lost in the void. Dead, gone, forever. She wasn't lifted from this bed by her own mastery or strength. The exile's presence alone was enough to raise her. Their bond. The dark and light side playthroughs are both interesting in their own ways, but the light side playthrough gives you a Kreia that, in the end, seems satisfied with her mission. What's the difference between the two? Well, a lot, moment to moment. But crucially, the light side playthrough is about healing. Unlike Satan, Kreia loves the exile, not because they are a chosen one, but because they have grown from their pain and made peace with themselves. The victim did not become a victimizer. Kreia is a wounded character who is able to find healing through the exile, and it starts right there in the morgue. The exile is clearly a powerful figure in the Force, but their true power lies in their ability to connect with others and help them heal. The lesson of Kreia is that by doing good, you can inspire others to be healed, and thus the galaxy can heal. Paradise Lost and Knights of the Old Republic 2 both end with the main characters receiving visions of the future. In both, life is redeemed and the cosmic civil war is finally over. The will of the Force created an endless cycle of death and war that Kreia loathed, but in her vision, balance was finally achieved in the Force, and peace would finally reign in the galaxy for the first time and forever. Then they made the sequel trilogy and fucked all that up, so that's why I hate them. Now, I don't assume that everyone who watches game content on YouTube is also a fan of Twitch streams, but if you are, consider swinging by one of ours. We've built an excellent community of game enjoyers who are honest about what we like and dislike, while also keeping an open mind about things. I've been streaming on and off for about 4 years now, which is insane to me. I can smell my bones grinding to dust as we speak. In that time, I've gone from streaming every day for literal months straight, taken several month-long breaks, and even dabbled in a few 24-hour endurance streams. I do not miss those. But I've made some truly great friends and lifelong memories. Recently, I was taking another one of those extended breaks from the stream when I realized how important that community is to me. The act of logging on and getting to chat with genuinely decent folks serves as a hopeful reminder that there are good people in the world. With everything we've gone through as a species over the past few years, this is a reminder I need for the sake of my own mental health. These days, I stream a modest 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 8 to 10 p.m. Central. But I found that schedule to be frequent enough to get good check-ins with the community, while also allowing me to stay excited for the next stream. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. Genuinely. If I don't catch you in a stream, I'll see you in the next video.